Let me explain how allowing family to stay temporarily somehow turned into losing ownership of my own home. I am an ancient scholar from a time when shelter was sacred and permission mattered deeply. Today, we examine a modern tale where hospitality was mistaken for surrender. This story belongs to a man who owned a quiet home, earned through patience work and careful planning. He lived alone, valued order, and understood clearly the difference between generosity and obligation. His sister arrived with urgency, explaining that her family needed a place to stay briefly. The request was framed as temporary, reasonable, and rooted in family loyalty. He agreed because helping family once does not usually feel dangerous. In ancient times, guests arrived with humility. Today, they arrive with furniture. His sister, her husband, and their children moved in with bags, promises, and gratitude. The first days passed calmly enough, filled with reassurances and appreciation. He was told repeatedly that this arrangement would not last long. Those words are often the first thing to expire. Weeks passed quietly, and small changes began to appear without discussion. Rooms were rearranged, personal items moved, and schedules adjusted without permission. The house no longer felt borrowed, it felt claimed. He noticed conversations shifting from requests into statements. Phrases like, "We will fix this later," and "We plan to do that soon," became common. In my era, plans required agreement. Today, they announce ownership. He attempted gentle reminders about timelines and expectations. Those reminders were received with smiles that carried no intention. His sister assured him not to worry, while continuing to settle in further. New routines formed that did not include his consent. Meals, noise, and daily habits began overriding his boundaries. The home he owned slowly stopped feeling like it belonged to him. When he raised concerns more clearly, he was told he was being dramatic. Family loyalty was mentioned often whenever discomfort was expressed. This loyalty appeared to apply in only one direction. His sister explained that moving again would be stressful for the children. Stress became the justification for permanence. In ancient wisdom, necessity is not permission. He realized that what began as help was becoming expectation. Expectation was hardening into entitlement. The question was no longer when they would leave, but whether they intended to. This realization marked the quiet beginning of conflict, because once boundaries are ignored, escalation becomes inevitable, and this story was only beginning. After realizing the arrangement might no longer be temporary, he began paying closer attention to every small change. What once felt like shared space now felt like territory being claimed inch by inch. His sister spoke less about leaving and more about settling in comfortably. Her husband behaved as if the house were already a permanent solution rather than borrowed shelter. Decisions were made casually about furniture, storage, parking space, and shared expenses. None of these decisions included the homeowner. In ancient households, authority followed ownership. Today it follows whoever speaks loudest. He attempted another calm conversation, clarifying that the stay was never meant to be permanent. His sister responded with visible frustration rather than understanding. She asked how he could expect a family with children to uproot themselves again. This question reframed generosity as cruelty. Her husband added that families should support each other without conditions. Conditions in this context meant boundaries. The homeowner explained that support without consent becomes intrusion. This explanation was dismissed as selfish logic lacking compassion. Compassion had quietly been redefined to mean compliance. He noticed that his sister now spoke as if the house belonged to all of them. Phrases like "our place" and "the kids' home" appeared without hesitation. Language often reveals intent before actions do. He pointed out gently that the house was legally and practically his. This reminder was met with silence, followed by visible resentment. Silence is rarely agreement, it is preparation. The children were now enrolled in nearby activities without discussion. Mail began arriving, addressed to his sister at the home. small legal footprints forming quietly. In ancient records, this is the moment wise men begin to worry. He realized that delay benefited only one side of the arrangement. Every day without action strengthened their claims socially, if not legally. When he raised this concern, he was accused of overthinking. Overthinking is often the word used when someone notices inconvenient truth. Family members outside the house began calling to express concern. Concern always focused on the sister and never on the homeowner. He was reminded repeatedly that blood matters more than comfort. Comfort in this case meant ownership of his own home. His sister accused him of prioritizing space over people. This accusation ignored the fact that space was the thing he had actually offered. He suggested again a clear timeline for moving out. This suggestion triggered anger rather than discussion. His sister claimed he was threatening the family's stability. Stability had quietly been built on his silence. In ancient wisdom, stability built on another's surrender always collapses. He understood now that politeness had been mistaken for permission, and patience had been interpreted as weakness. The situation was no longer drifting, it was solidifying, and choices delayed were becoming choices made for him. With silence working against him, he decided to speak clearly rather than politely for the first time. He explained that the arrangement had crossed from temporary help into permanent occupation. This clarity did not calm the room, it sharpened it. His sister reacted as though a promise had been broken, even though none had been made. She spoke about sacrifice, stress, and family duty, while avoiding the question of permission. Her husband stood beside her, presenting unity where negotiation once existed. Unity can be powerful even when it is wrong. They asked where else a family with children was supposed to go. This question again reframed boundaries as cruelty. In ancient courts, this tactic was called emotional siege. He replied that alternatives existed and planning was always possible. Planning in this case had simply been postponed because comfort was easier. The conversation grew louder, not clearer. Voices rose while facts disappeared. His sister accused him of changing after buying the house. Ownership was framed as corruption rather than responsibility. She claimed the home had become more important than people. People in this sentence did not include him. Extended family members began arriving uninvited to offer opinions. Opinions always favored the family that needed space, not the one that owned it. He was advised to be patient, generous, and understanding. None of these advisors volunteered their own homes. In ancient villages, advice came with contribution. Today, it comes free. His sister suggested they begin splitting bills to make things fair. Fairness was introduced only after permanence was assumed. He declined, explaining that shared bills do not change ownership or consent. This refusal was labeled controlling rather than cautious. Language shifted again, painting him as the obstacle to peace. He noticed his belongings being boxed and relocated without permission. Rooms once private became communal without discussion. His schedule was disrupted and his routines overridden. The house now operated on rules he had not agreed to. When he objected, he was told not to make things uncomfortable. Comfort in this house was now defined by everyone except the owner. He realized the situation had crossed into occupation, not legal yet, but psychological and social. In ancient times, territory was claimed first by behavior, then by law. He warned his sister clearly that this could not continue. She responded by accusing him of threatening family safety. Safety again meant uninterrupted access to his space. He felt isolated within the home he owned, and isolation inside one's own walls changes how decisions are made. This was no longer about patience or kindness. It was about reclaiming authority over his own life, and the next step would be decisive. After the confrontation settled into heavy silence, he understood that clarity alone would not restore balance. Silence in shared spaces often signals planning rather than reflection. His sister stopped discussing timelines entirely and behaved as though the matter was resolved. Resolution in this case meant staying without consent. Her husband began making changes to the house openly without asking. Fixtures were adjusted, storage was reorganized, and rules were implied rather than spoken. Implied rules are the most dangerous kind. He noticed conversations happening without him about household decisions. His name appeared less often in discussions about the home he owned. Ownership fades quickly when presence is undermined. He attempted one final calm discussion, requesting a firm departure date. This request was met with emotional escalation rather than cooperation. His sister accused him of betrayal, abandonment, and lack of empathy. Empathy again was defined as surrender. She spoke at length about the children's emotional well-being. Their well-being had become the shield against all boundaries. Her husband warned that forcing them out would destroy family relationships. Destruction was framed as inevitable unless compliance was complete. In ancient diplomacy, this is known as hostage morality. He explained carefully that refusing permanent occupancy was not cruelty. This explanation was rejected before it finished. Family members outside the home intensified their involvement. Messages arrived accusing him of greed, coldness, and selfish priorities. None acknowledged that the house was never offered permanently. History was rewritten rapidly and with confidence. He was now described as having invited them indefinitely. Memory becomes flexible when accountability is inconvenient. His sister suggested mediation only if the outcome favored her family. Mediation without neutrality is simply pressure with paperwork. He noticed legal language entering casual conversations. Phrases like tenant rights and shared residence appeared unexpectedly. These words were spoken lightly but carried heavy implication. In ancient texts, this is the moment counsel advises preparation. He realized delay increased risk rather than reducing conflict. Every day without action strengthened their narrative socially and legally. He documented changes, conversations, and timelines quietly. Documentation is the modern equivalent of witnesses. He informed his sister calmly that the situation must end. She responded with anger, disbelief, and emotional exhaustion. Exhaustion again was placed entirely on him. He gave notice requesting they leave within a reasonable period. This notice was treated as an act of aggression. Voices rose, accusations sharpened, and cooperation disappeared. The house no longer felt shared, it felt contested. In ancient wisdom, when a home becomes a battlefield, authority must be reclaimed. He understood now that restoring peace would require escalation, and that escalation would not be welcomed. After issuing notice, he expected resistance, but not complete refusal. His sister reacted as though the idea of leaving had never been part of reality. She stated openly that moving was no longer an option they were considering. Consideration had been replaced by assumption. Her husband spoke confidently about stability and routine, as if ownership had quietly transferred. They referenced the children's school's activities and friendships as evidence of permanence. Permanence built on another's property is still trespass. He reminded them that legal ownership had not changed despite emotional narratives. This reminder was met with accusations of heartlessness rather than facts. His sister claimed that calling this situation unfair ignored everything they were going through. Their hardship had become the justification for his surrender. Family members intensified pressure through calls, messages, and indirect warnings. He was told repeatedly that involving law enforcement would destroy the family. The threat of consequences was used to prevent action. In ancient councils, this tactic was called deterrence through shame. He observed that none of these voices offered alternatives or timelines. All advice pointed in one direction: silence and acceptance. His sister began asserting rights without agreement. She referred to the home as shared and implied that he could leave if uncomfortable. This inversion of logic clarified everything. The owner was now being encouraged to exit his own property. He refused calmly and documented every exchange carefully. Documentation does not escalate conflict, but it protects truth. The atmosphere inside the house shifted from tense to hostile. Doors were closed, conversations whispered, and cooperation vanished. He noticed his presence treated as intrusion rather than authority. His requests were ignored, and his concerns dismissed openly. His sister accused him of planning betrayal behind their backs. Preparation was reframed as malice. He consulted external advice quietly and learned the risks of delay. Allowing prolonged occupancy could complicate legal resolution. This knowledge turned urgency into necessity. He informed his sister again that remaining was not permitted. She responded with disbelief and emotional outrage. She accused him of choosing law over love. Love in this sentence meant surrender without protection. In ancient philosophy, love without consent is domination. He realized there was no peaceful exit remaining. Negotiation had failed, boundaries had been ignored, and authority undermined. The house was no longer a place of rest, but a source of constant pressure. He prepared himself for the most difficult decision, not because he wanted conflict, but because peace required action, and that action would soon arrive. The decision was not sudden. It was the result of many quiet moments of realization. He understood that asking repeatedly had only taught them that refusal carried no consequence. In ancient law, patience without enforcement invites occupation. He spent one final night listening to a house that no longer felt like his. Conversations continued without him. Laughter filled rooms he avoided. Avoidance had become his survival strategy inside his own walls. By morning, clarity replaced hesitation. He informed his sister calmly that authorities would be contacted if they refused to leave. This warning was dismissed as bluff rather than boundary. His sister laughed briefly, confident that family status offered immunity. Immunity exists only where law is absent. When they again refused to pack or discuss departure, he made the call. The act itself was quiet and procedural rather than dramatic. He reported unauthorized occupancy and requested assistance. Within moments, the weight of the situation shifted. Confidence evaporates quickly when consequence arrives. His sister reacted with shock, disbelief, and immediate anger. She accused him of humiliation, betrayal, and cruelty. Her husband demanded explanations that had already been given many times. Voices rose, urgency replaced certainty. In ancient cities, authority often arrived silently and changed everything. When officers arrived, the home's ownership became relevant again. Documents mattered more than emotion. Facts replaced narrative quickly. His sister attempted to explain hardship, loyalty, and misunderstanding. Hardship was acknowledged, but did not rewrite ownership. The officers explained calmly that remaining without permission was not permitted. This explanation carried more weight than weeks of discussion. The children were moved aside, while adults faced reality. Reality rarely announces itself politely. His sister cried and accused him of traumatizing the family. Trauma, again, was assigned exclusively to the outcome, not the cause. Neighbors observed quietly as authority restored boundaries. Embarrassment entered the story publicly for the first time. Public consequence often follows private refusal. His sister pleaded for more time, citing family bonds. The request was granted briefly, under supervision. Conditions replaced assumptions immediately. The house began to feel like his again, not through comfort, but clarity. Clarity often arrives harshly when ignored gently. His sister packed while avoiding eye contact. Anger and disbelief replaced entitlement. In ancient wisdom, consequence is the language boundaries speak fluently. When they finally left, silence returned. The silence carried relief and loss equally, because enforcing boundaries always costs something, and the cost had only begun to reveal itself. After the house finally emptied, the conflict did not disappear. It simply relocated into phone calls, messages, and family conversations that carried more emotion than accuracy. The silence inside the house was replaced by noise outside, where versions of the story began to multiply quickly. Outcomes were discussed loudly, while timelines and ignored warnings were quietly removed from memory. His sister contacted relatives immediately, presenting the situation as sudden and unnecessary cruelty rather than the result of prolonged refusal. She emphasized shock, embarrassment, and the presence of children to anchor sympathy firmly on her side. Permission, withdrawal, patience, and repeated discussions were carefully excluded from the narrative. Family members reacted to the ending without examining the beginning, which is a common pattern in modern judgment. Questions focused on how he could do this, rather than why the situation reached that point. Emotion filled the space where context should have lived. Messages arrived, accusing him of choosing property over people as though ownership were a moral failure. Property in this case meant control over one's own shelter, not greed or excess. People in this argument meant those who had ignored every boundary offered quietly. No one questioned why entitlement was allowed to override consent once emotions entered the discussion. The idea that help could have limits was treated as offensive rather than reasonable. In ancient times, generosity without consent was considered dangerous, not virtuous. His sister spoke often about trauma caused by authority arriving, while avoiding discussion of how authority was forced into the situation. Trauma was framed as sudden rather than accumulated through months of pressure. Cause was ignored, while outcome carried all the weight. He explained the full story calmly, to those willing to listen without defending himself emotionally. Calm explanations rarely compete well against dramatic storytelling. Some relatives listened quietly, while others preferred the version that required no reconsideration. Distance formed naturally between those who valued comfort over truth and those who valued clarity. Relationships strained not because of the action, but because accountability was introduced. Accountability often exposes conditional loyalty. Inside the house, routines slowly returned, and silence regained its meaning. Privacy felt unfamiliar at first, like a room relearned after being occupied too long. Peace arrived gradually, without celebration but with relief. He reflected on whether a different choice could have preserved harmony without surrender. Every alternative required continued silence, continued erasure, and continued loss of authority. In ancient wisdom, peace purchased by disappearance is not peace, but submission. He accepted the emotional cost of enforcement without questioning its necessity. Being seen as wrong by some was preferable to being erased by all. Clarity replaced approval as the measure of resolution. The conflict no longer lived in the house, but in the stories told about it. Stories would change, depending on who valued comfort over truth. And judgment now waited, not from family, but from reason. As an ancient scholar, I now offer judgment not on emotion, but on sequence, intent, and consequence. This conflict was not born from cruelty, but from patience, extended far beyond its proper limits. When consent was withdrawn repeatedly and ignored, enforcement became responsibility, not malice. Hospitality, offered temporarily, does not transform into permanent entitlement without agreement. Family bonds do not nullify ownership, nor do children convert boundaries into cruelty. In every era, shelter requires permission, or it becomes occupation. The call to authority was not the first choice. It was the final response to refusal. Those who criticize the consequence while ignoring the cause misunderstand justice. Justice is not gentle when ignored gently. Calling the police did not create the conflict, it revealed it. Authority entered only after every peaceful option had been exhausted. In ancient records, escalation follows silence, not speech. Many judged the ending without tracing the path that led there. They saw enforcement but not erosion, and consequence but not consent. Judgment without timeline is opinion, not wisdom. Was the decision painful? Yes. Enforcement always is. Was it unnecessary? No, because surrender would have erased ownership entirely. Was it justified absolutely because boundaries unprotected do not exist? This story reminds us that kindness without limits invites entitlement, and patience without consequence invites occupation. Boundaries speak softly, but they must be heard. To those who fear being called cruel for protecting their space, remember this lesson. Peace that requires your disappearance is not peace, but submission. Self-respect sometimes arrives dressed as conflict. If these modern struggles seen through ancient eyes help you think more clearly, then remain here where judgment is slow, calm, and deliberate. Subscribe to this channel, where new stories are weighed with history, reason, and restraint. More tales will follow, where modern confusion meets ancient clarity. Until then, guard your boundaries, value consent, and walk wisely. For peace earned through clarity endures longer than peace borrowed through silence.